hear me? Fantastic. So first of all, I want to thank you for listening to me in English, because it's the language I'm most comfortable in. And one of the privileges of speaking last is you have the ability to thank Nuqat, who've put 2 days of amazing initiative and bringing such like-minded people. So a hand of applause to them, and a testament that the future really is female. Absolutely. Rock stars, yeah. So I'm not going to take too much of your time. I think, Lemia, we should have traded. You should have had like 10 more minutes, and you could have taken into my slot. But I'm going to keep this really quick and hopefully painless for all of you. And I'm just going to speak from sort of my experiences and what I've been able to reflect on over the last few years of having pretty lucky to have pretty amazing memories and experiences. It was 2011, the 12th of November, and His Majesty Sultan Qaboos bin Said inaugurated the Royal Opera House, Muscat. It's, for anyone who's been or not been, it's an incredibly beautiful institution. It's a symbol that symbolizes the nation's affirmation for arts and creativity, and its significance in development, and its significance in sustainability. The performance of the night was Turandot. This is all on stage, and there's about, I think, 150 to 200 people on stage at this point. Turandot is an opera that is written and sung in Italian, set in China, translated in Arabic. It was one of the most incredible experiences that I've ever had. It was directed by the godfather of opera, Franco Zeffirelli, in his late 80s. It was directed by Placido Domingo, who is one of the 3 most famous tenors in the world, the other 2 being Pavarotti and Jose Carreras. I mean, the ability to be able to live through this historical moment is mind-blowing. And I can't begin to even explain the level of electricity and energy you feel when you're standing there amongst hundreds of people who have put this production together, on stage, off stage, under stage, because we have the orchestra's hub below the stage. And simultaneously, you have the orchestra and the chorus belt out the theme song to Nassim Dorma. It is both simultaneously one of the most humbling and one of the most empowering moments I've had to experience. And you're sitting there in an audience of 1,100 people, and you truly feel like you are the only person there, but also just how insignificant you are in the grander scheme of things. So that has just been an incredible experience, and it's really my experiences with at the Opera House and as a fellow at the Kennedy Center, which has enabled me to really understand the non-monetary value of the creative arts and its importance in development, be it the fact that today, it still takes the same amount of man-hours to put an opera like this on than it did 100 years ago. Because despite the amount that we have been able to leapfrog in technology, you cannot really be able to replicate that level of creativity. Or be it the fact that when the financial crisis happened in Greece, the industries that were really resilient were the ones of the local creative industries, their history and the culture and the literature that they have. Or be it the fact that, creativity has the ability to instigate and across dialogue between nations, and that's really cultural diplomacy. And cultural diplomacy is an enormous soft power that has the potential to, break down most barriers. It is where foreign nations come together to understand value in institutions of people that are different to them. Cultural diplomacy, however, is done at its best when it's really rooted in something which I believe to be responsive and responsible leadership. And this is a notion that I personally, again, this is all just my personal reflections, I've reflected on and tried to understand what does that mean to me and my core values. And I'm going to be very honest here, maturity and conscientiousness doesn't come to me very naturally. It's something that I have to plant in my subconscious that how do I make decisions that aren't necessarily just about myself, but are feeding into something greater and that are better for us collectively. If you look at the world in the context of this today, we are more connected than we have ever been in our lives with the transactions of trades and goods and services. It's colossal, and we are a global community today. We're a global village. And this global neighborhood, unfortunately, is showing a level of resistance, and the transaction and transfer hasn't necessarily transferred in values and empathy and inclusiveness. And when you look at that, it's really highlighted by Brexit or the US. It's highlighted by Myanmar and the Middle East today. So when I sort of very naively think about my experiences and think about the level of peace and tranquility and inclusiveness that I experienced as an Omani, I thought this was a rite of passage, but this could be further from the truth. It's not the story, and it's a luxury, and it's not something everybody in our region is able to have. So when I think about this, I think about sort of what this means to me and where do I see examples. And really, it cannot be denied that the tone of our nation is top-down. The ruling and the agenda that is set by His Majesty is really an exemplary example, I believe. And what I've taken away is the nuances of how he's run the tone and the fabric of our society with a statesmanship and not a politician. And I've seen that in the level of pursuing of foreign policy that is peaceful, the inclusion of an array of minorities. I've seen that in the promotion of dialogue and diplomacy. And more domestically, I've seen that in the grace with which he has led an array of stakeholders. And you can see that in the diversity of our population that, goes from Zanzibar to Balochistan. And you can see it in the promotion of prayer and practice, irrespective of your religion. And those are things that when I reflect and I think of, are meaningful, and that maybe I can, help teach my current children. And when we think about the identity of our nation, we think about what values do we want them to have. But by no means is this heightened level of emotional intelligence something that's by accident. If you look at the level of policy and practice that the nation pursues, it's integrally bounded within the promotion of creativity and harnessing of the humanities in our country. And some of these policies you can see, I'll just run through a couple on the top of my head. In the very early 2000s, the inclusion of minorities, His Majesty appointed Dr. Sharifa al-Yahyaiya as a Minister of Social Development in his cabinet, and she by no means was the first female minister. But she was barely 30 years old, and this is before talking about women involved in economic development was fashionable or part of our mainstream rhetoric, or that youth and millennials were, needed to be brought onto the table for policy initiatives. So definitely ahead of the time. You can see that what he's done with the involvement of ROSO. The ROSO is the Royal Symphony Orchestra of Oman. And when you decide that you want to have an orchestra that is fully Omani, that is playing Beethoven and Mozart, you don't create that overnight. So in the 1970s, he went out there and picked young children who showed artistry and raised them, built a conservation within his own palace, and taught them and raised them to be people who could perform in some of the most valuable, venues in the world. And that's a level of vision that he's shown. It's easy to sort of bring in people and say that they're going to be part of your band, but it's much harder to invest in human capacity, but it's definitely a vision that he's pursued. Or even education. When you look at what he's done in education, His Majesty has ensured that the humanities and arts is taught up until the early grade 11. So that's been some of the policies that he has promoted. And this is Rosso at the Royal Opera House with, I believe, an Italian chorus. And, men and women equally side by side. If you look at raising a nation and you look at sort of, when you're talking about education, raising a nation, what you see is that we're a very young population, and not just in the Middle East. We're a young population, well, the region being one of the youngest, but when you look at millennials in a global context, you see there's a shift happening and a rewriting of the social contract. You see that 78% of them are influenced by the company and how innovative it is. 36% believe that the point of business is to improve society, similar to making profits, and 44% believe that sustainable solutions are going to come from businesses. So what you're seeing is a real shift in values. And that values is pointing to a direction of diversity, of self-awareness, of autonomy, and of well-being. And well-being is a subject and is a topic that's come across quite a lot over the last 2 days. I believe the CEO from Zain had mentioned it quite exclusively. And when you think about well-being and you think about sort of the things that have happened since post-2011, and you see the changes that are coming in the community, you see that the measurement of gross domestic product doesn't necessarily measure things that are meaningful on the ground, and it doesn't capture the emotion. It fails to understand happiness, fails to understand sustainability, human dignity, the ability to have jobs and provide for yourself. And those things are going to continue to be important to us. And when we think about jobs and we think about the future, there are core things that will continue to be very important to us, not to just survive, but to thrive. And those will be critical thinking, collaboration, complex problem solving, and multimedia communication. And when you think about all of these things, creativity and the harnessing of that is going to be fundamental in making sure that happens. So when you think sort of, when the baby boomers and the Generation Y think about us and the generation that is here today, they will think about what we did for them. They will think about not how much our GDP was. They'll think about the policies that we made that allowed them to create value and to create dignity for themselves and to have jobs. And it's sort of our moral obligation to ensure that we harness arts and that we harness humanity to ensure that this part of the world doesn't continue to grapple with unemployment. And we don't become consumers, but we become creators that we can trade with the world. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.